Some people in this world are born with their lives already planned out for them, be it they were made with expectations that they would inherit a tradition or position in a family that they were known for, or they were intended to ensure that the bloodline would never disappear. Either way, this can lead to a child resenting the life that they were given, viewing it as more of a cage than a gift and rebelling against that, becoming almost the opposite of everything they were made to fulfill. And this idea rings true for the fabulously flamboyant, flashy founder of the sound slang style in Kimetsu no Yaiba, the sound pillar himself, Tengen Uzui. Now this video contains spoilers for Kimetsu no Yaiba up to the most current arc of the manga as of this video's release, so if you aren't caught up and want to avoid spoilers, stop watching here. Tengen Uzui was one of the major pillars in the demon slaying organization alongside the second physically strongest member of his group, falling only behind the superhuman Himejima. He was also a professionally trained shinobi and would use his ninja skills and his memorization of different combat maneuvers to invent his own personal demon slaying style. Though before we get too into that, let's discuss the meaning behind his name and his design. Tengen Uzui, much like other character names in Kimetsu no Yaiba, holds a meaning within it. Starting first with his family name, Uzui, which when broken down means the pith or essence of a household, or specifically the center of a home, which could be in reference to him being one of the 2 surviving members of his family, which originally had 9 children, but 7 died during their intense shinobi training, that his father forced his kids to go through. This training left him as one of the only people to inherit his household secrets, so he is the center of this household. And then you combine that together with his given name Tengen, which means the origin of heaven, you get the essence of the household is the origin of heaven. Or basically, his upbringing is what led Tengen to becoming the person he is now. And this is very true for the former shinobi, as after him and his younger brother survived their training, he noticed that his brother had become more of a man like his father, cold, heartless, and viewing his subordinates as nothing more than expendable. And his wife was nothing more than an object for creating babies. This wasn't a life that Tengen thought was worth living, and because of that, Tengen would more or less abandon his household, rejecting the teachings of his father but not the skills he learned as a shinobi, becoming a more flashier person, someone who was way more flamboyant, as he would say, speaking louder and more braggadociously, referring to himself as a god and demanding people worship his deeds, which ties into his name being Tengen, which is the origin of heaven, or basically a creator god. He also was just more physically massive and opposing than the slim and stealthy figure you would assume from a shinobi. Along with this, he also dressed in a very eye-catching manner, with his light rainbow-colored hair and multicolored painted nails. He would also encrust gems into his headband and wear makeup. He was the whole deal. He was embracing the idea of flamboyancy or eye-catchiness. He wanted to be the opposite of everything he was taught to be as a child. And he would make sure to instill this new ideology on life into all of his subordinates, telling them that they had a new flamboyant order of importance when it came to their missions, ordering them that they have to value their own lives above everything else. He doesn't care what they have to do to get away, be it leave someone behind or leave behind something valuable or just abandoning the mission altogether. They needed to survive above anything else. Then, they need to value the lives of the everyday normal people. And finally, once everything else is taken care of, then they can value his life, which is the exact opposite that most shinobi are taught. You are to value your mission above everything else, then the master who assigns you missions, and then nothing else. You were basically an expendable person or a tool of the person who trained you, but Tengen didn't believe in any of that. And while this mindset was confusing for his subordinates at first, over time they grew to adapt and enjoy it, gaining not only a survival instinct and a fear of death, but a deep trust for each other and a love for their leader. At one point, he would marry all 3 of his koinichis, both because he loved them, but also because it gave them incentive to come back to him, and not risk their lives ignoring his orders. And his wives also fit into this role of having disposable sounding names for disposable people, that later could be recontextualized to find beauty and personality within them, starting first with Makio, which means firewood or fuel, something that is used up until it's gone. But this name also plays well with her fiery personality, as she has the shortest temper of the 3 wives, going off on those when they doubt themselves, and it's this trait that keeps them motivated and working efficiently immediately, as if they show any sign of weakness, Makio will just blow up on them, and they don't want that. Then you have Suma, which is a name that is based on a plant which is ground up for simple medicine, which is again something that is used up and then disposed of. But much like medicine, she cares for the health of the others, and is more so a comic relief of the three wives, constantly worrying about not only herself, but everything around her. And then last we have Hanetsuru, which basically means baby crane or crane chick, which is a really fragile creature, something not meant for combat. And we see this represented fully in the story, as she's the only wife to be taken out of commission in a fight. But even in her weakened state, she finds the strength to stand up and return to the battle to supply aid, supporting others like a completely different type of crane. And together with his wives, Tengen would work at hunting and slaying demons for the Demon Slaying Corporation, using a wide assortment of tools such as kunai dipped with wisteria poison, or small explosives that are also mixed with anti-demon material. All of these tools allowed them to deal significant damage to demons and even hurt upper moon demons if they had to. Though one of the most powerful things in Tengen's arsenal is his Nichiren blades, which, much like everything else about him, utilizes the skills that he acquired during his training to become a shinobi while actively rejecting the shinobi way, with the blades being massive buster sword sized knives with large notches in the blade portion, assumedly for grabbing opponents or blocking attacks. Though what makes them interesting is that they're connected by the hilt via chain, making them very Kusarigama-esque. The Kusarigama was a weapon, while not developed by the ninja, were adopted by them, and were really handy in a pinch, as the chain allowed the stealthy assassin many options. They could defend themselves with the metal chain, or break guards by wrapping the opponent's weapon and pulling them in for an extra attack, or even, if desperate, use them as short-range grappling hooks. And over time, there was even a martial art developed for using said weapon during the 14th to 17th century in Japan, though the name specifically means chain and sickle, so these aren't exactly Kusarigama, but they are very Kusarigama-like. So while the weapons do help play into Tengen's shinobi origin, the modification from the chain and sickle to basically nunchucks with buster swords shows the more flamboyant and flashy person that he's become. But what makes these blades extra special is, unlike other Nichiren blades, they contain a very explosive energy to them, as when they collide, they erupt with an actual explosion that blows massive holes in anything that it hits. And how the swords got this explosive energy is actually unknown, as most people don't even understand how the weapons work entirely, as anyone who's been hit by them has died. But if I were to take a guess, I would assume that over time of using them alongside Tengen's other explosive weapons, they may have collected sort of a layer of gunpowder to them, as Tengen's specific style of demon slaying requires him to cut and detonate miniature bombs a lot, so it's not too out of the question that it could get covered in a little bit of gunpowder. Though speaking of that style, it's one that he developed all onto himself, using a combination of his shinobi arts and his gifted hearing. He calls it the Breath of Sound. The Breath of Sound is a slaying style that branches off of the Breath of Thunder, as its use of explosives mimic the sound of thunder itself. How this style works is Tengen uses his powerful hearing to begin to analyze the movements of his opponents and deconstruct those movements into sounds, and focuses on an internal rhythm within his opponent. He then compares this rhythm to a musical score and begins to read his opponent like sheet music, being able to maintain a powerful defense while waiting for an opening when his opponent rests to strike them when they are the weakest and their defenses are the lowest. And how he does his attacks usually mix together his sword strikes along with miniature explosives that Tengen adds in for a bit of extra destructive force on every single strike, though the bombs can be used in a multitude of ways. This results in a multitude of katas in the Breath of the Sound, which all have unique use purposes and use cases. So let's start with the basics and work down. Starting first with Breath of Sound first form, Thunder, which can sometimes be translated as roar. How this works is Tengen will raise both of his massive swords overhead, then slam them down on top of each other, causing a massive explosion below him. This will decimate most ground that Tengen is standing on, be it simple flooring or even hardened street rock. And the explosion itself is extremely loud and can be often mistook for thunder, hence the name of the attack, while also paying tribute to the breathing style that the Breath of Sound comes from. Then next you have the fourth form, Death Knells of Avicii, in which Tengen will hold both his blades outstretched from each other as far as he can and then twirl them in circular motions in front of him. With each rotation, Tengen will release an explosive that he then bursts, causing the explosion to be contained within a specific area of the said rotations that he's making with his blade. This makes the attack themselves focused explosions, which minimizes damage, all the while being both a great offensive and defensive tool. The name itself is in reference to two things. The first, of course, being a death knell, which is a bell that is rung to mark someone's death or oncoming death. And the bells in question, for reference, are the small explosives that are being contained within the attack, as these explosives would be enough to kill most demons, so it would be their death knell. Though, this being from Avicii is also very important, as Avicii is the lowest form of the Buddhist hell realms, and is where the most amount of suffering is felt. But given it's the lowest form of these hell realms, someone cannot be placed there. They can only end up there purely by their own actions, which fits well, as it's the most likely place the two fighting Tengen at the time would end up, as Gyutaro and Daki are some of the worst people even before they were turned into demons, and these traits are only elevated on their ascension. Along with this idea is reinforced when we see them post their deaths descending together into the flames of Avicii. Then finally you have the last form seen in the series so far, that being the fifth form, Symphony of Shrill Strings, which is an attack that requires Tengen to hold his blade in a reverse grip, all the while swinging his sword around in a circular motion, creating a disc or saw-like shape that draws closer and closer to his target. And to prevent the target from dodging, he also releases a multitude of miniature explosive charges that limits the movement and creates a narrow walkway for him to walk down towards his target. Now the name for this attack is quite simple. The whirling blades themselves are the rapid succession of strings, though in Japanese the name is harmonious with playing music during a funeral, or more specifically the music you play while someone carries a casket to its final resting place. And given the name of the attack and the narrow route of escape that it gives most demons, the reference is pretty obvious. And that is all the katas or forms that we see from the Breath of Sound performed during the events of the story, before Tengen is forced to retire as his fight with the Upper Moon 6 causes him to lose both an arm and an eye. Though what makes his fighting style so impressive is that Tengen, even outside of his katas, is incredibly fancy in his strikes, as even his normal attacks are incredibly flamboyant or eye-catchy, and they always carry some sort of impressive feat of strength along with them, such as when he extends the range of his slash by flinging one of his swords and catching the other with just the grip strength of 2 fingers, which is such a flamboyant show of strength that it impresses even a demon. Alongside his immense strength, he also has his shinobi training to give him dexterity to match it, being able to move at speeds equal to the slim and nimble Shinobu, with him not only being able to sneak up on people with superhuman senses, but being fast enough that he can get a sneak attack on an Upper Moon demon as well. Though, to be fair, Daki wasn't really an Upper Moon demon, she was only half of one. But it's still an impressive feat. He also, over his time training to be a shinobi, built up an amazing toxin resistance, able to keep up with an Upper Moon demon's poison that is said to kill people almost instantaneously, and even having a variety of methods to ensure that it doesn't spread through his body too quickly, such as being able to stop his own heart if he needs to cut off circulation and blood flow. Tengen is an absolute master at just about everything that he does, living up to his braggadocious nature, but he wasn't gifted. He worked his ass off for everything that he is now, also that he can ensure that he can keep up with and protect those people in the world who have actual talent. As when Gyutaro comments on him having to be a gifted person as he's killed many pillars like him before but he's so much stronger, Tengen tells him his perspective on his life versus others. He wasn't gifted, he's just someone who survives. Those with real gifts are the ones that he strives to be like. He wants to be a gifted swordsman like Mutaro. He wants to be as strong as Himejama. He wants to be a gifted leader like Rengoku, but he isn't. He's just someone who shows off and is as loud as possible to cover up his insecurities. And he's in a constant internal struggle with himself because every day he deals with his rejection of the teachings that his father gave him and had him go through for his entire childhood. And the first person to see past these defenses, the walls that he has built up his entire life, was his master Kaguya. Someone who showed him, even though he was constantly dealing with his own internal battles, he was keeping up with all of them. And that's why, even though he wasn't born with natural gifts, he is just as strong as Himejama. He is just as skilled with a sword as Muchiro, and he's just as amazing of a leader as Rengoku was. This being fully confirmed when Tanjiro looks up to him and sees shades of Rengoku in him. He is everything that he idolized in his friends and more, yet ironically, his own flamboyant nature blinds him to this. And luckily, Tengen was able to survive his brush with death, losing only one arm and an eye and being allowed to retire along with his wives from demon slaying as a whole, taking up a role as an instructor for trainees on the road to becoming a pillar themselves, being the first place people stop to train at, with Tengen's training focusing mostly on someone getting their body into tip-top shape with hardcore cardio work, but overall it's a lot of basic stuff. But if he really likes you, you get to eat a meal with him and his wives. Though it's perfect that he was chosen for this role, given how he honed his own craft to perfection, he wants to hone others to perfection as well, possibly giving them a bit of shinobi training alongside this. And it's in this retired state that he would dress a lot more casually, letting his long hair hang loosely down at his shoulders and covering his missing eye with a large eye patch with the remaining gemstones from his old headband attached to it. Along with this, he also wears a loose bright teal yukata, which at the time was basically the equivalent of wearing a bathrobe everywhere, reinforcing how retired Tengen was now, though he's always still willing to offer his life to protect the demon-slaying corp as a whole, taking up guard for the new master after his old one dies alongside Rengoku's father, symbolically standing equal with a man that he once looked up to. And hopefully, if things stay where they are right now, Tengen will survive this final battle with Muzan and get to retire peacefully with the three people he cares the most for, his wives, all of them never having to endanger their lives ever again. And my only hopes for his character in the future is a possible prequel story like Gaiden, showing us maybe a little bit more of his breath of sound, and maybe his relation with Rengoku. Besides that, I feel like his arc is basically complete. He's done everything that he possibly could, and left us with a truly flamboyant story. Now, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more videos like in the future, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/MediNotTheBadGuy. And if you want to become truly flamboyant yourself, you can start your training by buying a copy of Shimonetta, a boring word where the concept of dirty jokes doesn't exist, at buyshimonetta.com.